Okay. Okay, so if you remember right, whoops, we need to go back one. One of the things that we were looking at near the end of yesterday was just different factors and stuff that have been found to contribute to substance abuse. Now, these in and of themselves do not directly lead to substance use, but they are factors that are predictive. So if we combined all of these, then we have a pretty robust re, uh, um, pretty robust predictor of who may or who may not lead to substance abuse. Okay. So one of the factors is boredom, also known as there's two types that tend to lead to substance abuse, and that's existential boredom, and that's a lack of purpose in life. Okay. Um, this is just feeling like life is just life, and either you're just here and live it, and so you drink, or you don't know what it's about. So to escape from that boredom, that lack of purpose, we drink. So it is kind of two-pronged. One, you drink just because there is nothing that you find, or it's because you can't find purpose in life that it's frustrating to the point of drinking. Okay. Interpersonal boredom, being bored with small talk versus having feelings of happiness with people. So this is a very common issue with individuals, with couples who go through that excitement phase of getting to know each other, and getting all those butterflies and euphoric feelings of being in love and those deep talks that you may have used to have. And now it's getting into the mundaneness of everyday life. There's no more major talking. Maybe you've talked everything, and small talk just starts to become kind of boring and monotonous. And this can lead a lot of couples to do what's called co-substance abuse, where they both use because they're bored with the uh, sober existence, and so they use a substance which lowers their inhibition or increases their feeling of euphoria that replaces that used to be exciting part of their relationship. Okay. And that's just an example. There's other kinds of interpersonal boredom. For example, college students and their roommates may result to substance use because they've gotten so used to living with each other 24/7 that they want to use substances just to kind of break free of the monotony of their life. Okay. Impulsivity and disinhibition, so traits such as sensation seeking and aggressiveness tend to predict substance use. So the instant need of some type of emotional or physical, psychological satisfaction, which many substances can bring, can increase the chances of use. And aggressiveness, the need to be non-inhibited by the use of someone's natural aggressiveness. They can get drunk and they can be aggressive, and it gives them one an excuse and two a disinhibition in order to do that. The whole idea of this comes out of, and research on this comes out of research on domestic violence victims and offenders. In some areas, it was believed, well, my spouse only abuses me when they're drinking or when they're using drugs. And so the impulse was, well, let's put them through alcohol and drug treatment. Okay. And that will reduce the aggression. Okay. Which for a few people it did. There were some people who went through drug and alcohol treatment and really never got physically aggressive again. That doesn't mean they weren't other types of abuse, but they became disinhibited with it. However, for the majority, meaning greater than 50%, it actually made them more aggressive and more imaginative in the way that they were aggressive and abusive towards their spouse. Because once they went through substance abuse treatment, they realized that they felt like the drugs gave them a justification for abuse, but they learned the drugs were something else and that they always had that tendency to need to control and be aggressive. So they could be aggressive with a perfectly sober mind. Okay. And so that's where that impulsivity, disinhibition kind of can play a role. But when we don't treat the primary problem, such as being an aggressor, a domestic abuser, and even on other ends, such as depression and anxiety, it can make that primary motivator actually worse. So, some examples coming from the mental health arena, people who self-medicate for depression and anxiety. Putting them through drug and alcohol treatment is great, but we find out unless the depression and anxiety is addressed, the depression and anxiety gets worse, not better. So, um, this is an example of how we need to make sure we're paying attention to those core factors that contribute to substance abuse in the first place. So, social learning theory is a theory that has been thought of about alcohol use. So, social learning is we learn through watching others and modeling others' behaviors. And they argue that alcoholism or alcohol use is socially acquired. It's a learned behavior, a pattern, and maintains antecedent cues, and is a consequence of modeling and the influence of people in one's life. Okay. And so this just basically says and is parents who model drinking usually will have children who drink. Okay. Parents who model sobriety tend to have children who drink. Oh, we'll get to that later. And I'm just joking on that kind of. I'm kind of a snarky on that, but the point being is social learning theory says it's a pattern of socialization that leads to alcohol use in the first place. Okay. We'll explore this a little bit more later on in the class about parental involvement in substance use among children and adolescents. And we'll see that it's a lot more complicated than just simply saying that a child is socialized into the drinking world. And we'll get into the complications of that as we move along. Okay. However, social learning and cognitive behavioral patterns about addiction tends to suggest that addictive behaviors are learned maladaptive behaviors, that we learn them through that use, through that experience, and occurs on a continuum of use. Sometimes it might be every 6 months, and then it will continue to intensify 3 months, 1 month, every week, twice a week, 3 times a week, and those types of things. And that's the addictive process. And it's determined by social situation and environmental factors, beliefs, expectations, family history, prior learning experience. And one thing that I do just kind of want to focus on in this section here are situational, environmental factors, and partly family. Okay. Um, One of the studies that we did when I was working contracting for a women's prison is we wanted to know whether or not um, what was the primary reason that despite giving a very thorough drug and alcohol program, counseling, and all of these services, so that when a prisoner left prison in this situation, they had all of the skills, some of the world best types of treatment, but their recidivism rates were still really high. Why is it that um, you can give someone all of the skills they need, the motivation, all of those things, but that still doesn't seem to have an effect on their life? Okay. Well, we looked at two separate data and compared them. In the correction system, when you're released from prison, you're usually released to the community for which you did your offense, or you lived before while you were doing your offense. But there's also something called interstate compacts or intrastate, where the offender is actually put in a different state with different friends and family. And intrastate agreements is that they're put in a different community where their old habits weren't there anymore. Okay. And we found that one, offenders who were released back to the community they came from had about a 75% recidivism rate. However, the people who were released to other communities with different people than when they came into the system, their recidivism rate went from 75% down to 12%. Okay. And we will get into this, what's known as the drug and alcohol culture and influence, and we will see that this social influence for addicts is huge. That if they don't escape the social place that they came from, they're highly likely to recidivate or go back to drug use. So that's kind of the importance when we're thinking again about especially tertiary prevention, meaning the person has gone completely through treatment and is in the recovery process. What preventative measures should we have uh, or help them get in order not to recidivate? Changing your social world, changing your friends, changing the relationship with the family is going to be an important conversation. Okay. So that's what this suggests. So now the social cultural model says that the influence of culture on rates of alcoholism, okay, that really there is a cultural component to alcohol and substance use, okay. And so it's the degree to which culture cause acute needs for adjustment on inner tension. So one, how is it that a culture responds to stress? How does a culture, what is a cultural belief about what you should do when you're experiencing dysfunction of some type, and then cultural attitudes towards drinking. Okay. And then finally, the extent to which the culture provides substitute means of satisfaction. Okay. So this is just one cultural influence here in the United States, is one to feel like you're depressed, sad, going through grief. All of those things are not things that our culture encourages individuals to disclose. You're supposed to have the inner personal will to get through those acute experiences. Okay. And if you can't, well, we're not going to give you the coping skills to do to, but one way to relieve that inner tension is through drinking, because that's absolutely okay in our culture. Okay. I come from the state of Montana, And they always joke that cityhood could not be given to a town in Montana unless there was at least one bar. Come to find out, that was actually in their original manifest of incorporating cities, that it did need to have that. I mention that because the drinking culture here in the United States is very much on the pro end. Okay. And that comes to the attitude of drinking. If we look at advertisements and everything else, you'll never see an alcoholic in a ad for Bud Light. Okay. Um, and then the extent to which a culture provides substitute means of satisfaction. And again, if you think about the options to adults to go out and have fun in many cities and many places, it's either very limited or it's very cliquish, meaning it's not somewhere you would feel comfortable going. But hey, there's always the bar. There's always those places for adults just to go and maybe relax and dance or whatever it may be. And it always will involve, it usually involves some type of drinking in that way. Okay. Now, I'm talking very broad cultural basis here. This doesn't mean every communities have this problem. But again, this comes down to what are communities and cultures doing to make it so that there's more avenues for individuals to experience their world and make meaning and satisfaction in their world, to be able to take care of inner tensions and also change the attitudes towards what drinking does. Okay. And so this is going to be another area that we're going to talk about when we go through each of those areas of prevention. Okay. And then there's a Freud in interpretation going to psychology and other psychological mechanism. And he argued that um, um, fixation on oral stage of development resulting in narcissistic personalities, which, if you remember, narcissistic personalities are a factor in drinking. Uh, they they the other theories that come out of psychoanalytic group, usually doing only with males, is the idea of masculine inadequacy, that you don't feel man enough unless you have a beer in your hand or you outdrink your friends, or because it's being the sober one in the room, that's kind of emasculating. Um, and then the other argument, one of the early arguments for again domestic violence, is abusers used alcohol and drugs to suppress their latent homosexuality or ego-dystonic feelings of homosexualities. So drinking was a way of relieving those homosexual tendencies in men. So um, how do I put this psychoanalytics into perspective without offending every person in the room, or every guy in the room who thinks they're emasculate for not drinking, or that they're masking up their homosexuality for drinking? This is what the research actually says about this, is yes, we do find that men are more likely to drink with other men to feel the connection with the other men, because that's a manly thing to do. So there is research that supports that idea. We also know that individuals who are experiencing homosexuality, or who are gay, but are in a very repressive environment where if they were to come out, they would end up homeless and on the streets and probably violently beat up and whatnot, do use alcohol and drugs to repress those feelings of they can't experience the sexuality that they are. Okay, so we're going to take out not all men do it to suppress homosexuality, but there's definitely a large population, and we can actually expand this to LGBTQ communities where alcohol and substance abuse does seem to be an issue. And the main reason that's driving it is the feelings of rejection and everything that they're experiencing from their world. So, kind of wanted to clarify that. I gave the pure psychoanalytic version first, and I hope I cleaned it up a little bit to make it a little bit more understandable to where it is today. Okay. Also, on the psychoanalytic end, is caused by structural deficit in object relationships. So, in this, individuals, I'll just read this. Individuals have a hard time establishing effective interpersonal relationships due to their difficulty in managing their affect and impulse control. Drug use to cope with overwhelming feelings of rage and loneliness. So, I want to talk about this just for a minute on two ends. Is that it is correct that people who measure high on social inadequacy, meaning they don't have a lot of social skills. They don't have a lot of socialness to deal with the world. Okay. They do tend to use substances in order to make it so that they can interact with other people. Okay. And sometimes it's a false belief. I had an alcoholic uncle who believed that people only liked him when he was drinking. Okay. Even though he was awesome when he was sober, he was one of our favorite uncles. He had this belief that people only liked him when he was loaded and drunk. Okay. And that's kind of what this point is trying to get to. On another extreme end, okay, let's go to the other end. If we look at people who are, for example, serial killers like Dahmer, okay, Dahmer did not have the social skills to go and attract his gay victims. He had to get loaded on alcohol so he felt more confident about himself in order to approach his victims. Okay. So that's another example. There's a grouping of psychopathic serial killers that are what's called the social inadequate category. And the reason why they tend to engage in serial killing is one, they want to figure out what people are doing. You know, you think of Dahmer drilling holes in top of heads. He was exploring to try and figure out what made this gay man tick. Okay. Others have done that too. And they all involve some type of substance abuse to get over their interpersonal relationship anxieties. Okay. I know those are some extreme examples, but I wanted to give a good so you remember. Okay. Loneliness, yeah, as you all know, that's one of my major areas of study. And yes, loneliness is very much associated with substance use. It's one, if there's two things that loneliness predicts in the immediate situation, it's alcohol and drug use, and depression. Okay. Those are probably when we think about becoming lonely right here and right now, those things are two predictors that if it continues will result in. Okay. Um, some other things that are associated again with substance use is it frequently denote power or feelings of powerfulness for the users, especially for the stimulant drugs such as cocaine and methamphetamines, have powerful meaning as a weapon of self-destruction or ultimately death. So yes, a lot of people use substance. Substance is highly associated with, for example, completed suicide attempts. It is associated with the destructive cycles of different disorders where a person goes through a destructive cycle. Um, in our culture, especially in a few others, it has the symbolic seduction and sexual meaning, and this is what's exploited. For example, in advertisements, is the grab to it because you'll be look more attractive, you'll be more seductive. Um, but I would challenge you to go to a bar at midnight and see how that works, and go completely sober and just watch people. It's not so seductive. But anyways, I'm kidding. I hope you're laughing. All right. Existential issues. Dealing with the limitations of existence. So, for example, limitations of life itself and how long we'll be here, the unpredictability of the world, pain from poor health, that feeling of hopelessness and loneliness. Okay. And then drugs are a way of escaping these existential issues, at least for a while, to gain some type of temporary relief and to change the focus of the moment. Okay. We mentioned this a little bit before on Tuesday, but things like poor future orientation and hope. Individuals who see future as negative might abuse drugs. So continue patterns of academic failure. Oh, my future's going to suck. Frustration with career growth. All of these types of things uh, can lead to different types of substance abuse. Thinking that your future just isn't there for you, that you have a poor outlook on life and where you'll be 2, 5, 10, 15 years ago. Okay. And this is something that is actually currently being researched in the field of psychology with time orientation and identity. Okay, we have found that people who have conflict cultural identities tend to become current oriented, meaning they're not able to see beyond today. Okay, especially when they have a conflict between the two. All right. And where this finding tends to be most robust is among Native American youth who want to be a part of that broader American United States culture and aren't well connected or want to leave their Native American self behind. Okay. That we find that we're finding, and this is new research, so there needs to be more done on it, that conflict in those cultural identities make it so that the youth get stuck in a current time orientation. And it's almost like there's a cognitive block about being able to think about their future and think about where they could be 5, 10, 15 years from now because they get stuck in that conflict of their cultural identities. Okay. And so this then creates that poor future orientation. One way to cope with it is through substance use. Okay. So it's an interesting line of research. Maybe we'll pull out a few of the research articles so that you all can see them. But maybe this can also be something we should think about when we're thinking about prevention, and providing a source of hope for the future might be another thing that we put in our prevention toolbox. Feelings of hopelessness. So this can often be done through social or traumatic means. So person gives up and stops trying because unable to get out of poverty or continually having financial disasters, frustrated, blocked goals and aspirations, maybe physical health issues, blocks in learning and achievement, being able to go to college or being able to do what one wants to do, continual shame and loss and pride of emotional and physical and sexual violations, and exposure to traumatic situations. So these all lead to that sense of hopelessness that again lead down the path of substance use. All right. I think we got through the introduction. I know this was a lot of information, and yes, I would get some uh, things that you can read on these things that we've talked about in lecture. Um, but I do. We'll go ahead and stop here. It looks like I went quickly through today, but that's okay. We're on the start of our Labor Day weekend, but I will end with, let me stop the recording. Whoops, forgot to do that.